Okay. All right. Let's make sure that actually worked. Is that actually working? Somebody seems like they're trying to talk, but I'm not hearing them. But anybody trying to talk? Sorry, I'm trying to make sure we're recording
Same.
just because.
Says
Yep.
it's
Okay.
recording on my end.
All right. Here, so just as a reminder, the recording, um, and I'm going to turn this off and we'll just use that in a second with the sound. That way, maybe it'll be clearer. All right, so just as a reminder, since we weren't recording a second ago, modifications scenario, since the property is under contract, we're going to use Laney Lister. There's Laney Lister's email address, and it doesn't have to be an internet lead. Pat can be a referral from somebody if that wants. Pat could be from your sphere, like wherever Pat comes from, it doesn't really matter. Pat is the one that wants to buy the condo, okay? So let's look at some of the questions, just so you, if you didn't know, that some of the questions that we got when we were looking at I don't know who that was. So we will look at some of these questions. All right. So how familiar are you with number 1103? And is there a particular reason for your interest in this unit? Good question. Have you been inside 1103 or the Park Regency before? Good question. Are you familiar with the building and amenities and association fees? There are other units at Park Regency. Would you be interested in information on those? Let me know your space requirements, price, budget. Be happy to provide info on the properties that best suit your needs. Once we identify those, we can set up a tour. I would love to help you in your search for your next home. Please let me know when you can meet. What brought your attention to the Park Regency? Have you visited before? What's your first availability to see the property? Are you available tomorrow, Friday? I didn't respond to that before Friday, by the way, because it was the storm. I was wondering if you're looking at for a unit in that building specifically or considering other areas. What has your home search process been like up to this point, and when would you ideally like to be in your new home? I think it's one of the best questions that was asked, by the way. Like it was one of those that I was like, ooh, that's a good question. So talk to me about these questions. What are your thoughts on how these questions kind of play out? What's the commonality in these questions?
Yes or no answers.
A lot of them are yes or no answers from the standpoint of, have you seen the unit? No. Like they aren't super diggy, right? Like they aren't they're not engaging, super engaging. And I know it's a little awkward, right? We're communicating via email instead of talking on the phone. But try to do it as if you're talking on the phone. Pat will respond in the email as if you're talking to them in a real live conversation. Think of it as a really slow chat. Back and forth instant messages, but just really slow. And try to think of it that way, because we are going to need to emulate showing and those sorts of things, because obviously I'm not going to see it. Pat's not going to go see it in person, and we'll go from there from that perspective. What else about these questions do you kind of feel or think?
I was desperate for context.
Okay. And so you were desperate for context. What kind of context?
Nothing. Like I don't know why. I think my main thing was like, is he interested just in this building? Like he's got a friend that lives in 1104 and he like wants to move there.
So,
Or
so
is
what
he
response did you get from Pat to help with your
I got
context?
like details about that.
Okay.
I don't think Pat.
So some people got a lot of details and some people did not. Now, why is that? Because the questions you ask, right? And like to your point, Christina, if they were simple yes, no questions, Pat's kind of a busy guy, and when you ask him a yes, no question, he says yes or no. He doesn't elaborate on his own. You have to dig and get those questions. And so this is a role play, but not in the sense of an easy role play, right? It's not meant to be a simple role play. It's meant to be a somewhat complicated role play. I'm just going to make this go away so that it doesn't keep popping up and making messages. Um, so that's part of what's that?
It was short answer. I guess maybe I'm.
Okay, but if you're nosy, you got to ask more questions, right? And that's what I was saying last week about our personalities, right? Like everybody's approach was different in the way that they engaged people or the way that they kind of drew people in from that perspective. So I'm gonna. We also have with more questions than this. So like this is another one that I thought was really good. If we found the perfect place this weekend, would you want to buy it now? Are you wanting to wait till closer to your lease ending to purchase? Also, did you sign any paperwork with that other agent prior to viewing the unit? Now, there's some things in there that you might not have known about, Pat, because this is a response to multiple questions, right? And so clearly, Pat rents nearby. And oh well, okay, I kind of let that one out. Pat rents nearby, and he has talked to other agents and engaged with other agents. So that's a piece. I'm curious what's prompting your move from your current rental to wanting to buy a condo in the area, which was a nice diggy, not a yes, no, right? Like there's no way to say yes or no to that. It's a open-ended question that required some explanation, and I had to provide some explanation, which I did. Um, how soon would you like to view the property? Have you narrowed your search area price range? Do you have any general questions about the Atlanta market? Are you familiar with the area? Or would you like more information about the neighborhood? I also love to hear about what's important to you in finding a new home, whether it's the layout, location, or community. Your preferences can help guide my search. Excellent. Guide the search. If the open floor plan and style of this condo appeal to you, I also want to mention there are two other properties built by the same developer with similar floor plans that might interest you as well. Excellent point. Very specific knowledge that Zach shared with us last week that this builder that built Park Regency built some other park buildings that are very similar. And are you currently working with an agent or have you been searching on your own? Okay, those are different series. The first set of questions was all mostly about do you why do you want this unit, right? Like what about this unit and do you want to go see it? These questions tend to be a little bit more into the nosy nature of, hey, why are you wanting to buy this? What's happening right now? If you're renting, do you want to buy right away? All those kinds of things. And so you can see there's a whole myriad of questions that come through that. What of those do you feel are the most important? Like, what are the key pieces of information and the key steps that we were trying to do through this series of questions and initial engagement? Those online, feel free to pop in and talk.
I was trying to run through a sort of LP Mama situation. So location, price, motivation, the agency, mortgage appointment, but I only got through a couple of them because of the nature of the conversation.
Yes, it was like I said, it's the slowest chat on the planet, but that's okay. It still allows us time to process an ideal response as opposed to just having to think on our feet and talk, right? And that's part of the process. So I think that was good. Seth, you got just FYI, I think that Seth got more information about the person, about Pat, than anyone else, including the last bit of information. Was it this morning that Pat let you know where he worked? Uh,
Yes.
so, just all kinds of details. So he did a great job of engaging. And we probably had, I don't know, six, eight, so, however many emails back and forth. So again, treat it as a chat, less as an email. I know those of us that are older, struggle with email, thinking emails are, long, blah, blah, blah. And we'll look at some examples here in a minute that have some good and interesting concepts involved in them. But what else, so getting through that process, that's a good point. Staff is trying to get through that sequence of information, right? What else are we trying to do in the initial engagement? What was the goal?
The engagement agreement signed.
Ultimately, the goal for this week was to try and get a buyer brokerage signed. Did anybody get a buyer brokerage signed from Pat? Anybody online get a buyer brokerage signed? No? Pat didn't sign any buyer brokerage agreements. I will say from my perspective, because this is not an easy role play. It's a little bit challenging, right? Which is the point, to try and make it somewhat real world. Pretty much all of the requests, I had several people that just sent it to me and said, before we get together, I need you to sign this. Pat's a little skeptical. Pat did not feel like he needed to do that. So I don't know why, that's just not Pat's style, right? Pat wanted to talk about it. How many people engaged and tried to get a buyer brokerage signed? Alex tried. What was Pat's response to you, Alex?
When Pat wanted to talk about it in person.
Right.
Before, so I said we'd meet up.
Okay.
Lobby.
So you were going to meet with Pat and talk to him in person about the buyer brokerage agreement. How do you think that's going to go?
There might be some resistance still, and it could be awkward because then he's still gonna want to see the unit, but he might not be willing to sign. But at least at that time, we could do some modifications, maybe just to limit it to that building or limit it to a time frame. So I can negotiate with him if he's not willing to sign.
So I think that might be one of the ideal ways to handle that situation. And so, because you said a couple of key words in what your response was. And for those of you online, if you couldn't hear, Alex said that Pat responded that he wanted to talk about it in person. Could we talk about it when we get together to do the showing? And my immediate thought was, oh crap, no, I have to have this before I do the showing, right? But I don't have to have it before I get there. I don't know why these won't stop popping up. Okay. My immediate thought again was that oh no, I need this before. But the reality is I just need it before I show them the unit, right? So Alex's response of meeting them in the lobby and being able to speak to them face to face, and as she just said, negotiate and explain why the buyer brokerage is important, is probably going to be much more effective in person than it would be over the phone or via email or instant message or any of those things, right? So I think that's an ideal way to handle it. Now, depending on your relationship with this person, right? We've set this up as they're a pretty cold, no, you don't really have any connection to them. If they were, as we did one of the modifications, if they were a referral, maybe Pat goes a little bit differently because, Donna said that he should work with you, and, therefore he's got a different level of trust with you. But if he's a cold person, like for most of us, then he's a little skeptical. Now, what has to happen for you to be able to have him sign the buyer brokerage agreement on site in the lobby of the Park Regency? What do you need to do?
Find a printer.
Find a printer. That is definitely an option.
I've done the in-person signing on Dotloop.
You can do. Yep. So with Dotloop, you can do in-person signing on that, and that's perfectly acceptable. You can also, they can sign on their phones, right? So if you're not 100% certain of what the terms of that buyer brokerage might be, right, you would fill it out the way you want to fill it out, and then have that conversation, show it to them on what I would recommend a big screen, whether it's a tablet or an iPad or whatever, or even a computer. Show it to them on that, and then say, okay, are you comfortable with that? They say yes, great. Email it to you. You click your email, hit sign, and you're done, right? And now but that makes us have to be more mobile. It makes us have to be more technical. If you're not that technical, Seth's suggestion of find a printer is an excellent suggestion. And maybe you leave a couple fields blank, or you allow for a scratch through and a fill in, back to the old school practices. Because we used to always carry contracts in our trunk, right? Like that was the way we did business. We would drive around with copies of all the forms in our car because we had to, right, as Donna said, we would write the offer on the hood of the car. Like that's the way we did business because that was just the resources we had. Now we have so much more technology to make it a smoother process that I think it's interesting to evaluate that. So I think that's an important point to understand, that you don't necessarily have to have the buyer brokerage signed before you agree to meet them, or even before you meet them. You have to have it signed before you show them the property. That's a fine line, right? Like it's a distinction. And the reality is you have to be prepared that if Pat really is a dick and says, well, I'm not signing that, let's go upstairs. Nope. It's not how that works, right? Because settlement says I have to have this signed by you before I can show you the property. Now, if they won't sign it while they're standing there, you guys are not going to work well together. Just gonna go ahead and call that out, right? Like if Pat is that much in conflict with you that in standing there in person, you can't explain it enough that they can either sign, a 1 day, one property buyer brokerage agreement, man, I think that's a big red flag that there's going to be an issue.
Right, this was a step ahead of where I got as of this morning, but my logical consideration was Pat expressed interest in some response to some of the questions that are up there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the units was going to have appointment only with the listing agent present. So I didn't really want to blow that up before I knew if Pat was going to cooperate.
Okay. And so, because you didn't go so far as
No,
to
that was my
even
next step.
mention, so, and that's, again, it's a scenario and it's a little weird because it's chatting via email, which is a slow process. But don't be afraid to rapid fire, right? Like as soon as you get a thing, respond back. Pat has responded to things all night and day. Doesn't matter, because Pat is perfectly fine at those sorts of things. And Pat has written out a list of all the answers that he's given other people. So he can make sure that you get the same answers. But that is a piece that you have to dig to that point. And I think that's one of the important things that we got to, is that thought process. So let's go through, there's a couple of complete responses that we got that Pat got that I thought were worth pulling up kind of independently. So this is something that Pat got from Pat. Just I'll call Pat Finnick out because he's a broker, so we are allowed to call each other out. But this was his email, and there's some really cool things in this that I think everyone needs to have a glance at. So he was like, thank you for contacting me. You have great taste. All right. Now, Pat is old school. That is a sales skill that you should know if you don't know it. By giving someone a compliment on how wonderful they are, you have just released all kinds of endorphins for them, and they are now open and ready for you to be best friends with them, right? Like that's an overstatement, but reality is that's an amazing way to lead it off. I really like all aspects of that building. again, you've made a good choice, right? Truly great features, and best of all, easy parking and convenient location. Great things. At 600K, it certainly seems to be in line. Of course, viewing the property in person will validate the online images, which is a valid point, shows his experience. Currently, there are 6 properties for sale, average price of 652, 3 sold in the past 6 months, average sales price is 663. Here's a quick link to my website that lists the 6 active properties. My website is automatically updated with Atlanta properties. You can search all properties, or I can set up the search on your behalf. Now, especially as an internet lead, this is a really good thing, or even as a referral. I don't know if this link is going to work. We're going to try it. Yeah, there it is. So this is what is referred to. Guys, online, can you see this page, or do I need to share differently?
I can see.
Okay, cool. So this is what is referred to as a squeeze page in KV Core. Notice that this is all the listings in the Park Regency. That is the only thing on here, is these listings in the Park Regency. And it gives me stats for the average price in the Park Regency and the average in the county, which, I mean, in our world is not super useful. But anyway, walk scores for Park Regency, average days on the website in the Park Regency. So basically days on market-ish. And then I can click on any one of these and see more details or save them. And check this out. When I click that I want to save it, what happens? I now have to register and put my information in, right? And because I tried to save it. But I can also just see view the details. If I click it, yep. And now I can see all the pictures, and I can request the showing. And all of this is tied to Pat. Well, I think in this case it's actually tied to Holly. But it's tied to the agent that sent it. Okay. So this is what's known as a squeeze page in KV Core. Those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, Rachel, for those at Remax Metro Atlanta, is a huge resource because she can help you identify how to set up a squeeze page. And you can set up as many squeeze pages as you want, and those squeeze pages are designed to capture a lead's attention. If Pat has acknowledged that he really is most interested in this building, but you could also have set the squeeze page to that immediate little area. Pat has said, I want to be walkable to that area. If you haven't gotten that response, Pat wants to be walkable to this area. He enjoys walking around to all the amenities and things that it has to offer in the area. You could set that search. You could to widen out the search to the immediate surrounding buildings around there, which include some of the other parks. So I think that's an important thing for us to consider and look at from that perspective. Let me see if I can make this go full screen here again. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Looking at me learning on things. So I think that's an excellent thing that you should leverage because it will set you apart from the average agent. What's the average agent do? Average agent maybe sets up a search in FMLS and shoots them that portal, and it looks the same as everybody else's. KV Core one is customizable, and by the way, everything drives back to you. So that's a great thing. The other interesting thing that Pat sent through on one of the future conversations, which hence the line, is that I need you to make you aware of Georgia rules and laws regarding real estate agency. Here's a link to a short video I made regarding agency. Now, I gave Pat a hard time because Pat did not actually make a video, which I very much wanted him to do, but he did not. And so it's an amazing idea, right? Like we talked about, like the difficulty of trying to explain this in words and in writing and over the phone or whatever, like make a little video that just says, this is why I do this, and be real positive and upbeat, and you can share that with anybody
Let
that,
us look at that. before we
and
send
do
it out.
do let us look at it before Donna says, do let us look at it before you send it out, because we do want to help you make sure that you're being compliant. And it's like anything else, like marketing materials. You want to make sure that you're, covering all the right points and not saying the wrong things. But I thought that was an excellent add-on to the request for information, from that perspective.
Talk about this right there, to me, means that you are an expert in that area.
Mhm.
I mean, just flat out within a few sentences.
Yes, he has shown his experience, and his knowledge, even though Pat has, as he pointed out last time, he doesn't even know what this building is, where it is, right? But he came across as an expert on that, and I know he could back it up if pressed, and we're gonna work through that with him. Fortunately, he couldn't make it today, but I'm sure he'll watch the recording and get a good laugh out of this. All right, another one that I got, is this one. This was one from one of our newest agents. And it says, thank you for reaching out. I too am still recovering from the storm because I didn't respond and said, I'm dealing with a storm, so sorry. So I completely understand. Excellent connectivity, right? Speaking to what I said in the previous email means that you're listening to me, right? Does that make Pat feel good? That make Pat feel great, right? Pat has just gotten some empathy, from this agent, and so now Pat feels a connection there. I'd be more than happy to show you the unit this week. How does tomorrow evening sound for reviewing? In addition to the unit, I'd love to pull together a list of similar properties in the area. You give me a little bit more information on what you're looking for, open-ended question. This will help me make sure I'm aligning with your specific needs when I send over the options tomorrow. I'm acknowledging that what I'm doing is specifically for Pat. This is just for Pat, right? One quick note. I love the way that it's just a little quick note. By the way, with the new real estate procedures in place, we do need to have a brokerage agreement signed before viewing the properties. I've attached it to this email. Just sign it and send it back, and we'll be all set for tomorrow evening. Looking forward to meeting with you and showing you the unit. Now, do you think Pat signed that?
No.
I think that was a great introduction to it. But had there been the video link, or had there been a little further conversation, or the offer to, hey, I've attached it so that because here's one thing that I would personally do. If you attach it so that Pat has time to read it before he's meeting with you, then now Pat, you can have a good functional conversation with Pat in a matter of a couple of minutes to discuss the terms within the agreement, right? And so I do think attaching it is helpful, but the tweak that I would do is, are there people that would sign it and send it back? Yeah, of course there are, right? And so maybe you do say, if you feel comfortable, please feel free to sign it and send it back. Or let me know if you have any questions, right? Which is always the best open-ended question, right? Like open-ended. Or I'm happy to discuss it when we first get together tomorrow, before we show the unit. Before we show the unit, right? So that I think is very helpful. I don't know, the video thing for me is just huge. I think that's a great way to personalize and share that information. And you only have to do the video once, right? Like you do the video explaining why. It doesn't have to be personalized. And you just do that video once and share it over and over and over and over again.
And then they see you too.
And they
Right.
see you,
Right.
they're going to hear you, see your facial expressions. They're going to get to know you in a way that they can't get to know you otherwise, right? So from that perspective, any other comments or questions about these last two responses? Because these were the two, we won't call them winners, but the two best responses that Pat got overall. And one was from probably the most seasoned person, Pat Finnick, and this is literally a brand new agent that just joined us. So excellent work from that perspective. All right,
Brett, I have two things to add real quick.
go ahead.
As far as those video messages go, I love video messages and I use them all the time. And I'm always hesitant when I'm not dressed in a suit to send a video message to a seller. Um, but sometimes we just got to get over that. And I think two things to add to your video message is saying how excited you are about helping them.
Yep.
Like say that over. And something that Adam does very well is he uses his laughter and
That
he,
$1 million smile.
he laughs a lot, and it makes people I don't know, people are attracted to having fun.
Mhm.
So, it's like
Let your personality shine
you're
through, right?
faking it, So
Yeah, I think those are great additions, Ken. Is definitely let your personality shine through. As Donna said, this is them getting to know you. This is them seeing if they want to work with you or not. So I think that's important.
Are there any video tools or repositories available to us other than YouTube?
You can include in KV Core, you can include videos into your messages. I don't know for sure. Rachel, do you know if they have to be hosted somewhere else, or or Lori, do you know if they have to be hosted somewhere else, or can they just be embedded into KV Core?
They can just be in, you can actually, I believe, go ahead and just record a video in there if you're going to go ahead and put it in your email, I believe.
Okay.
Of course, you could have them hosted somewhere else and still put a link in there.
Yeah, so you could put them on YouTube. Just be wary of the what pops up after. It's always
Yeah, always.
yeah, it's not. And then there are other.
You pull up their email with all the storage, so.
Yeah, but KB Court's going to be a link to something in. You're not going to send them. It's not sending the whole email. I mean, the whole video. I don't think. Rachel, any comments on that?
I haven't done the video where you record right into it, but I know you can embed, like you can do a hosting site and embed it in there. And some of those even disappear within 48 hours, the video itself.
Okay.
I'll look into it to get more info for you guys.
Yeah. So as always, if you have questions about those sorts of things, Rachel is the guru. Like she knows or will figure out how to help you do that. There's other platforms like Vimeo, and just there's plenty of things out there that you can do it with. And I think there's even a paid edition in KB Core that it has some kind of video thing added on. So just, talk to Rachel about doing that if that's something that you're interested in doing. Ken, what do you do when you send videos? Where do you put them?
I usually just record them on my phone when I'm sitting here and I text them.
Text them. Okay. Which is another option, right? Like if you're communicating via text, then you can just send it over in a text and a link, right? And that way it'll go right through from that perspective. So, talk to the younger folks. They're better at this than some of us old fogies. I want to, like bring it into Adobe Photo Studio and like edit it and do all kinds of stuff before I send it out. But to Ken's point, right. I like to use a little AI to make sure that, it does some work here and a little here. But to Ken's point, don't be afraid to show you, right? Like one of my favorite, I did like 10 years ago. I did a video, I made a top agent do a video of a property. And it was for a subdivision. And we were in the model home and she did this whole walkthrough of the subdivision and the model and all this stuff. And she would not publish it. She would not let us share it in any way because she hated the way she looked on video. And you know what my comment was to her? Because I'm such a nice guy.
That's how you look.
That's how you look. Like, no offense, but this is what I look like, right? Like this to the people in the room and to the people online. This is what I look like, right? Like Camera's not gonna make that better. It's not gonna help. And so just don't be afraid. Like, you're gonna meet these people in person. They're going to see you, right? Like, so maybe just be you, right? Like, to Ken's point, just be authentic and don't be afraid to show who you are, because that's who they're gonna work with. If they don't want to work with that person, you probably don't want to work with them either, right? Not all clients are meant for all agents. We have to remember that. That's an important piece that we have to pay attention to. Okay, Ken, thank you for getting us on that path. That was super helpful. Any other commentary before we get to this last response, which I had forgotten I had one more. This is also a response that we got. Let's read through it here. I'm a licensed associate broker with RE/MAX. I would love to help you in your search of a new home. I'm a fourth generation native of Atlanta. I grew up in the Buckhead area for the past 30 years. I've lived and worked in the in-town market. I have 19 years of real estate experience and have vast knowledge of all metro Atlanta neighborhoods, business areas, and schools. I would love to help you in your search for your next home. What do we think about that as a response?
All about him.
It's all about them, right? It's all about that person, about them as an agent. Now, what are they trying to do?
Right, they're trying to introduce themselves.
They're introducing themselves and trying to give a little bit of a background and show their expertise, right? Why else would you say I have 19 years of real estate experience, right? Because you're trying to convey that, hey, I'm an expert in the market, right? If you had to choose, and we're not singling people out, but this is why this is great, because everybody gives different responses. If you had to choose this person showing themselves as an expert compared to this person showing themselves as an expert, which one do you think wins most often? Probably this one, right? Like, what Donna's comment about this was, wow, this really shows that they're an expert. Now, could you have sprinkled in a couple of details from that other? Hey, as an Atlanta native, I really love that neighborhood. It's one of many that I've done business in over the last 19 years. See how that spreads a little bit? Just weave those things together. Marketing is a journey of proper weaving of stories, right? It's about storytelling. And your engagement and your communication with people, whether it's verbal, in chat messages, instant responses, videos, whatever, is you telling a story. And I believe, from my vast experience in this industry, that I think this is the way to do it, to weave it into a story that engages the person. Engage them with the things like you have great taste. That's an amazing way to pull it in. Another one, thank you for reaching out. Responding about the storm, right? I think Pat's response to their first email, which, to give this agent another kudos for being new, they sent an email on Sunday, I think. Pat did not respond because Pat was tired. And then got a follow-up email on Monday saying, hey, I just wanted to touch base. And then Pat responded and said, so sorry, I've been dealing with recovering from the storm, hence this response. Right, no electricity. Pat didn't get electricity till late Sunday afternoon, and so Pat was a little bit distraught over the weekend. But it's all good. And the compassion that this agent had and tied into, like, makes me feel comfortable. Now, does this agent send the same expertise vibe as the first or the third one?
Not so much like history, but more of like, I'm willing to work for you.
Right. The intent is there, right? But the expertise is not being shown. This is a brand new agent. So it's kind of logical that there's not a lot of expertise being conveyed here. But this is kind of the other approach, right? Like, when you approach people, Pat's an analytical person. And Pat likes the numbers. That's part of the reason why Pat really loved this response, because there was data in it, right? And so Pat loved that data. But not everybody responds the way Pat does, right? And Pat also loved the fact that this person clearly cares enough to be listening and is aggressive enough to be checking in, but not aggressive, right? Like you can tell that this person cares about their clients and is going to do what they need to do to take care of their client. And in the series of emails, that was very clear. And so don't be afraid to be you. Don't try to be somebody else. So I always have said, as when I teach agents to be agents, I can teach you to be like I was an agent, and I was a very successful agent. But I also have a degree in mechanical engineering. I'm kind of a jerk. So that's the approach that I take when I work with clients. And some clients don't want to work with me. Quite a few clients don't want to work with me because of that. But then there are clients that want to work with me because of that. And the best explanation of that is that when my wife took over my business, when I became a broker, she couldn't stand pretty much all of my clients. And they really didn't deal with her because she is not me. She is more lovey-dovey, touchy-feely. Let's go have lunch and talk about it. And I'm like, we're not stopping for lunch. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, this is what we're going. And so, you have to figure out the people that you want to work with. And not every client is for everyone. So I think that's important. All right. So let's talk about, because this is education. It's not just us reviewing, but I think the collaboration of being able to see what other people have said, hopefully is very helpful. There have been some amazing just one-liners that I would use in scripting going forward. And so, again, I'll send out the recording of this so that you can see it. Things you need to focus on, building that rapport and connection, right? Building that sense of, regardless of how you're doing it, you got to build that connection and rapport. And the only way to do that is ask questions and respond by listening. Active listening, we know, is an important thing, right? You were supposed to focus on providing information and setting up a showing appointment. Not everybody got to that, but that was kind of the goal for this week. And then the other key point, right? We know we have to try and get the BBA signed. And really the key step before that is to explain the agency. I think the video option is huge for that. And I'm hoping that I can force Pat into actually reporting that at some point so he can share that with us, because I think that would be excellent. Is share that. But remember, you have documentation that you can share. There's nothing wrong with having shared the ABCs of agency and a copy of the buyer brokerage agreement, right? Like
The
people,
consumer guide from NAR.
the consumer guide from NAR, the protecting yourself with buying a home. Like you can provide those information pieces before you actually meet with them and give them time to respond. I don't think Pat was available other than Thursday evening for anybody to go show property, although with the newer agent, maybe she agreed to Wednesday. So you have some time typically, right? I know everybody's like, well, somebody calls and they want to go see it right now. Okay, yes, that does happen. But more often than not, people are trying to schedule things, right? They're not sitting in front of the property waiting for you to show up and show them the property. Although that I've seen it happen, right? Happens, it does happen. But a lot of times, majority of the time, I would say, people are trying to schedule. And so work with their schedule, work with your schedule, schedule something, and make sure that you're providing them good information for them to review before you get there. And worst case, you have to execute the buyer brokerage agreement on site before you go upstairs, which is totally doable.
Most people start their search online.
Of course.
Right,
Right.
so,
And you
working,
have
communicating online for a while.
And you have to remember that people are not just communicating just with you. If you ask Pat, he has talked to other agents. He's even seen some other properties, but he hasn't signed anything because I don't have a good explanation. No one has asked me why. And really it doesn't matter, right? As long as I haven't signed anything, if the other agent is breaking protocol, if they're a realtor and they're breaking protocol, you know, tooey on them, but you know that Pat hasn't signed anything and that we can move forward from there. So let's get to the point that this week, what I want to focus on. So your goal for this past week was to get the buyer brokerage signed. I think we've talked about that and those issues. Any conversation about trying to get the buyer brokerage signed or any options or thoughts on trying to get it signed? I mean, I think we've talked a lot about that. I just had this in here just as a recap.
I think, well, maybe one other piece of information, which I didn't want to bother the listing agent, but finding out ahead of time for that unit what they're offering. So you can say, my fee is 3%, they're offering 3%. Because some of the units were offering 2.5, so then you have to have that discussion up front of how that's gonna work.
And did you see that in FMLS?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they had it
Some of them
listed.
have it in there, right?
Yeah.
So here's my comment to that. Do I care if this property is offering compensation to the buyer's agent or not? Not to show it,
Not to show it.
but it could come up in the conversation with the buyer brokerage agreement and getting that signed, right? Because you're going to want to put a number in there, not just put 0. You're going to want to put a number. And so you need to be able to have that conversation with and without that knowledge, because there's going to be times where you might have it and there's going to be times where you won't have it and you're not going to get it. So from that perspective, you just need to think through some of that and think through some of those options.
Well, what do you think then about a situation where you're having them sign the brokerage agreement, let's say at 3% in the example, but I already know this property is only so far offering 2.5. I know we can make an offer with a special stip.
And that's
It
just
feels
remember
a little
it's,
iffy.
but it's not icky, because remember it's a negotiation, right? And just because they sign a buyer brokerage agreement with you at 3% and the listing ends up being 2.5%, don't you have the option of modifying your buyer brokerage agreement to drop it to 2.5 if that's acceptable to you? So you have to, it's a negotiation. And so this is just a starting point. Okay. So don't think of it as it's not written in stone or in blood, right? Like it's just a contract, and contracts can be modified. And you, as a good negotiator, can potentially negotiate on their behalf to have the seller pay the other 0.5% that you want, right? Or 1% that you want, or whatever, right? Like there's all kinds of things that play into that.
Yeah.
So don't,
Successful, sometimes it's not.
of course, right?
On
There's,
the sidebar, did you have a chance to read what was GAR sent out yesterday from Seth?
so that's a whole other thing. Let me get through this for just a second, and then we'll definitely talk about that. That's a whole class, because it was 6 pages long. But anyway, all right. So that was the goal, to get the buyer brokerage this week, right? So you need to, again, proceed normally, ask questions over the email. And though, just remember, even though we're communicating via email, you can have a meeting or have a call with Pat. It's just going to be via email. So again, slowest chat form in the universe, that will allow you to have that conversation back and forth with Pat, and of course Lenny the lister. Now also you can you communicate with them as a listing agent and not bother Jane, which is fine from that perspective, and Lenny can provide you any information that you need on the property, schedule showings, all that kind of stuff. I think that's, yeah. So that's the piece I want you guys to focus on this week. Let's have the showing, which of course means you have to get the buyer brokerage signed ahead, have the showing, and then, go from there. What happens after the showing? Okay. And Pat's not going to be super difficult, but Pat is going to be not easy, right? Because we want to get through some of the typical objections and things that we run into and some of the issues that we have. One is a spoiler alert for those that are not overly familiar with condos. Condos are hard as hell to buy right now, because lenders don't have, like, the biggest issue is insurance. Insurances on properties have massive deductibles that are causing all kinds of issues with the lender. So we're going to have some conversation on that. So just as a heads up, make sure that you're digging properly with this process, and we'll introduce a lender at some point too. I'll have to come up with a good lender name so that we can have, and I do have another domain that I can use. So we'll use a different domain for that one and get that up and running. I have business licenses for a bunch of them. I'm trying to let all of those go away because I'm really tired of doing all the taxes. Lisa Lender. That's a good one, Rachel. So we'll get you the people, and I want this to be as real world as possible, which means, like, for instance, somebody, I think it was our newer agent, sent over that they had attached, but there was no PDF attached. I want to see the real paperwork. I want to see you having filled out the paperwork. That's part of this process, is evaluating how you execute the documents, right? Remember, this is a core GAR contract class. We are talking about GAR contracts in the scenario of a real world situation. So which ones do you use? When do you share them? All those sorts of things. I do think for those of you that didn't get all the way to setting an appointment, or didn't get all the way to asking for a buyer brokerage, get there. Just do it quickly. I mean, literally, Pat was answering emails this morning to several people. Pat will engage with you quickly. If you ask Pat a question, Pat will respond relatively quickly, especially now that Pat has power again. And so that can be from that perspective. Any other comments or questions before we end the recording, and then we'll talk just a couple minutes, if you want to stay late, about the new thing from GAR. Louis the lender. That's a good one too. All right. Any other comments, questions? Then I am going to.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you guys for being online. I will send out the recording. I will make sure those of you at the RE/MAX Center office get a copy of the recording. And then we will proceed forward with the scenario. This scenario is designed to go all the way through closing. So bear with us. It's going to take us a few weeks to get there at this pace. We can pick it up a little bit, but this is a process, right? And I want to go deep dive in every step of the process as we go through. So if you're watching this, and currently it's October 1st. If you're watching this and you haven't engaged Pat yet, jump on board. You can still engage Pat and catch up very quickly. So don't be afraid to jump in and participate. So thank you all for your time, and we will see you next Tuesday, and when we talk about how the showing went and where you might have gone from there.